So I'd just like to first introduce myself and my colleagues. So from the right, this is Niclas, and this is Mads, and myself is David, and we're representing Copenhagen Business School from Denmark. So let's dive into it. So we have this mission with Slovenian Forest Limited. We need to change some things, but we also believe that there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. This is forestry, it's relatively simple. And we think that you should learn from the best. We have divided it into 4 different points in terms of dividing this 5-year business plan for Slovenian Forest Limited. We've looked into the situation, the complication, our solution, and the impact we believe that our solution would have. Currently we see that we have a state-owned fund. The challenge is we have 13 concession companies, and these are running out now. So we need to see, do we want to renew these ones, continue with them, or do we want to do something else? The other challenge is also that we see there's quite large unrealized potential. We see the public side, there are some things that we'll tap deeper into. And we also see on the private side we have a very fragmented market, and there might be some opportunities that lie within that. Furthermore, we don't really have an action plan. If we see some unpredictable things, we don't really know what to do. In terms of the complication, we see that the fund is consistently underperforming to its European peers, and obviously we need to do something, and therefore the concession, they might not be the best solution. We have the highly fragmented ownership, so we see that there's some mismatch, especially on the private side, in terms of the supply and demand. And we see it's inefficient, and it's not very transparent, and we also see that it's prone to corruption. So our solution is basically to say, we want to increase efficiency, we want to focus on the environment, and we want the enterprise to be established, the Slovenian Forest Company. Our impact will be, after these 5 years, an ROA 3.4%, and this is going to reach a level equivalent to the European peers that we think are comparable to this company that will be established. So let's go a bit deeper into the industry. So if we look at this map up here, we basically look at the different European countries, and we rank them according to forest on GDP, and we look at the forest area compared to the total area in the respective country. And what we see from this is basically that Slovenia is placed 3rd in terms of forest to total area, but we see the story is a bit different when we look at forest to GDP. We see 3rd, and they're 7th and when we look at forest to GDP. So it looks like there is some potential that is hidden up here, and there is some room for improvement. Compared to the peers, we kind of see the same picture. We see that for the past years, since 2010 and up until now, the fund has consistently been underperforming compared to the peers. The best ones probably being Sweden, Austria, and Finland, because we see Germany performing extremely well, which is also due to their geographics and also just the density of the woods, which makes it less comparable compared to the others in terms of the ambitious level. Furthermore, we see that the productivity is also not high enough. But the question is then, well, is this bad for Slovenia, that the productivity is low, they're not ranked very well in terms of forest GDP, and we see that they're not very good compared to their peers? No, it's not. The thing is actually we have tons of room for improvement, so it would be worst case if we had this and we couldn't do anything. So we actually see this as an opportunity, and we see that Sweden is 3.5 times more productive as the best performer, and we see that that's a pretty good indicator that some of the best performers, they're focusing on productivity. So the key in terms of return on asset is focusing on how can we drive up this efficiency and how can we become more productive so we become more similar to, for instance, Sweden and Finland. Then we broke down and said, okay, we have 4 main business models that we can go in. We have the traditional concession structure, we have problems with prone to corruption, we have low transparency, and to be quite frankly, we don't really get any return that are of any particular interest. And we decided to say we want to retain the ownership, but we want to outsource the operations. So why did we want to do that, and why didn't we want to go full scale and build this company, build the capabilities? We think that it's a very high capital requirement. We think that within 5 years, it's a bit ambitious building up this entire project. And we also think that we don't really have these capabilities internally in Slovenia, so why start building these? Also in terms of that, we have to keep in mind that this is the Slovenian state. So we have some other goals than short-term profit. We also have some long-term goals for the benefit of Slovenia. So we decided that, and we also think the level of commitment is quite suitable to our strategy. And going deeper into that, I'd like to hand over the word to my colleague Mads.
Thank you, David. As mentioned by David, the key issue here is the gap in productivity. We see that the top performers are 3 to 3.5 times more productive than Slovenia at the moment. This is where we see the key, because increases in productivity, increases in efficiency is what will drive up your returns on your forest assets. We see that you can achieve this efficiency gains through, first of all, digitalizing the entire supply chain, which is already being done in Finland and in Austria and has had huge cost savings as a result. Also, we would recommend you to hire in special consultants, particularly from the Österreichische Bundesforste, because they have a very dedicated team of consultants with proven track records doing projects already. And thirdly, we believe that if you switch to a contractor-based model, you will have more flexibility with the contractors, and this would also increase the efficiency, because you can easily switch out than you could previously, where you were binding yourself for 20 years to a single concession firm. Secondly, this is the main focus, of course, efficiency. That is how you drive returns. Secondly, we also see a large opportunity within environment and biomass. We see that Slovenia has a very large part of their renewable fuel stemming from wood at the moment, and we also have the EU targets of the Renewable Energy Act with a target of 2020 that will drive demand abroad. And finally, enterprise is the third leg of our strategy, as we see the establishment of one single entity rather than 13 entities, because this would achieve scale. And scale is very important in terms of having a large actor on the market that can stabilize the timber market in cases of high volatility, as we saw earlier this year with the ice break. So these are the three key points. First of all, you should hire the consultant. This is our recommendation to you, because they have previously had implemented very successful forest management systems in Georgia, in Ukraine, in Asia, very successful, and they're not far away. And what they would do is to train the local workforce here to increase efficiency. They would train the contractors, because again, efficiency is key for driving asset returns. Secondly, digitalize the entire supply chain, as has been done in Finland and Austria. Doing this would enable you to track the trees from the forest stand all the way to the sawmill, because this would increase the efficiency of the supply chain. It would cut down delivery time of the wood. It would drivers on the road could be directed efficiently to the most optimal routes, and loggers in the forest would know exactly where to log to get the most efficient supply chain and the lowest delivery time. Again, if these two measures are implemented, they would drive down your cost 8% each. Also, again, today you have the concession structure. It has been underperforming. We see here today 90% of the total value of the timber that's sold from Slovenian state forests today goes into the concession firms. Today the market value is around 60 million euros. That means that only 6 million euros actually reaches the Slovenian Forest Fund today. That's not satisfactory. If we switch to a contract-based model, we look towards Finland. Finland also has a similar model. They own the forests in the public company, and they retain the right to the timber, which is key here. However, they outsource the actual operations of the logging of the wood and the transportation of the logs to the sawmill. We propose a similar model, because if that is implemented successfully, you would actually be able to achieve additional revenues of 26 million euros annually, and cut the cost to 50% rather than 90%. And also, the second part, as I mentioned, enterprise. The establishment of one single enterprise, rather than having 13 independent ones, would enable you to gain clout and economies of scale, which are key in forestry. And this large scale would enable you to achieve more bargaining power with railroads, with large buyers abroad, or with wood processing firms in Slovenia as well, because we also want the entity to be competitive. And also, very importantly, it would act as a stabilizer in terms of turmoil and volatility, buying wood, selling wood, and helping out the private sector, just as we saw. It could have really benefited the Slovenian timber market in February when we had the ice break, if this had been in place. And now my colleague Niclas would like to take you through the rest of our strategy.
So not only have we learned how to increase efficiency within the harvesting, but we've also looked at where should you actually focus your sales effort. And we've identified an opportunity within the biomass industry. And there are two main reasons for this. The first being that there's an increasing foreign demand for biofuels as part of the EU 2020 plan, which is to reach a level of renewable consumption of 20% by 2020. The second reason is that by focusing on the biomass sector, you can develop your internal capabilities in Slovenia and become a European frontrunner within the biofuels industry. Obviously, there are also some risks to these initiatives that we are proposing. The biggest being that we're not able to fully implement the cost savings and efficiency that we are providing. In order to mitigate this risk, you should instead focus on becoming an internalized organization where you handle the harvesting yourself, thus building capabilities internally. It will take a much longer time period and not be as fast, but it will be a feasible opportunity over a longer time period. The second most important risk is the risk of a natural disaster or other economic shock to the market. And as Mads just mentioned, we see an opportunity to mitigate this risk by establishing a governmental player that's able to regulate the market. If we look at the timeline for implementation, then it's really crucial that you start now. We have a situation where in a year's time, you will have the entire state-owned forest without concessions or firms to operate these. So you'll have to start looking for contractors now. When you've found these contractors, it's about starting a pilot project, testing out on a small scale, and then scaling up, hiring in the Austrian consultants, implementing the digitalization, as well as starting training your staff, thus developing the skills of the workforce. This would end out with an evaluation after 2 years, where you see where this project is going and whether you should continue it or not, or start internalizing your capabilities. So looking at the financial results of our strategy, there are really two sides to this. We've looked at a 5-year time horizon, and it's important to note that the critical thing here is really the speed of the implementation. How fast can you develop this workforce? How fast can you use these skills of digitalization and cost savings? So we believe that in the best case scenario, you can reap a benefit of 26.8 million in a 5-year time period, and you'll be able to reach an ROA of 3.4%, which is a similar level to the peers we mentioned early on. So now my colleague Mads will just walk you through what will happen after our 5-year period.
Forestry has a very long production cycle, sometimes up to 100 years. Therefore, we've presented you with our 5-year business plan. However, it's also imperative to look further ahead. We see the main issue further ahead is the very large degree of fragmentation currently in the private sector of Slovenian forests. The average estate size only being 2.6 hectares. This very small size is a disadvantage because of the large economies of scale, which means that small foresters don't have the access to machinery or to capital that would enable them to harvest as much as they could. So today we see actually only 70% of the planned harvest is actually cut in the private sector, meaning huge potential for increase in the total Slovenian forest sector. And as a state-owned enterprise, you have other objectives than only your own profits as well. You benefit the entire forestry sector of Slovenia. We believe that through cooperatives with Slovenia Forests Limited and the small local foresters, they will gain access to economies of scale as well, which would enable them to harvest more often and to increase the yield. And so to summarize our 5-year business plan for you, we believe that the key is efficiency. You need to drive up productivity because that is where you have the biggest gap to your European peers. We believe that can be done through implementing private contractors and retaining ownership of the forest rather than concessions. We believe it can be done by hiring specialized consultants right now with proven track records that can speed up the implementation process of this. And we also think that digitalizing the entire supply chain would guide you, would secure the future growth as well and cut costs for the future. We see environment as a huge potential because of the EU regulations and renewable energy. And finally, we see the establishment of one enterprise, one large entity in the Slovenian timber market as the key to stabilizing the market in terms and in times of volatility. And so if you're able to achieve this, you'll be able to get an ROA of 3.4%, much higher than what you have now by 2019. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is our 5-year business proposal, and now we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, members of the panel, who would like to ask the first question? May I ask if nobody's there?
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
5-year plan. We are not in Gostland, we are not in Russia. How could you accelerate it? Why not in 3 years?
I'd like to take that. I think one of the main reasons here is that you're looking at a state where you're currently at, where you're a very low, very much behind your peers in the European market. So it would require a lot of investments in order to educate the entire labor force to reach a similar level of productivity. And I think within a 3-year period, I would say that's a very quick time horizon.
You touched my second question, investments. There was no mention of investments. How much is needed in 5 years, or how much would be needed in 3 years?
So the model we've built now, it's, as we told you, a contracting model. So the investment is very much in the loss of revenue streams that you have. You can say the payment that we demonstrated in one of our slides, that you pay almost half of your revenues to the contractors. That's similar to what they're doing currently in Finland. And we believe there's also obviously a cost related to, for instance, the consulting project. We've seen similar projects for around €500,000.
$500,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's in, for instance, Georgia.
And the digital.
Any other question?
So there are quite a few constituencies here. Whom do we need to convince and how to get this whole program started?
I'll take that one. First of all, of course, the biggest constituency to be convinced is right now the concession firms. They're going to resist this because at the moment they have a very, very lucrative deal where they get the right to the timber and they pocket the most of the income. They are going to be resisting this change, which will, of course, their concessions are expiring, so they don't have legal right, but they will do, it's our expectations, what they can to block this, because they will lose the right to the timber, which will go to the Slovenian Forest Limited instead. So we believe that they are the main obstacles for the implementation of this plan.
Okay. Tanya?
Well, you mentioned Austrian consultants, but as I read from the case, Austria's model is specific in terms that it combines tourism and wood forest management. Did you consider this part in Slovenia too? How to implement, let's say, our tourism potential with the forest management? Because it's quite obvious here.
I can take that. We've considered that, but we thought for a 5-year plan, our initial drive would be that one of the main targets is that we want to drive up return on assets. We see, I think, was it in, which model was it where we had 9%?
In Austria.
In Austria,
as well as in Germany.
As well as in Germany, we see 9%, so we definitely see a potential. And also specifically for the tourist perspective, we also think that it's a good way of driving this in. But we want to develop the capabilities first, reach the peer group level, and then we can start expanding into more adventurous projects, if you will.
Yeah, Mr. Jakschak.
I will go on with a question. Slovenia Forest Service managed with 10 hunting reserves for special purpose. What's your opinion? To join that hunting reserves to that enterprise, or to be separate? Because from your question, Israel has a similar question. Another question is, in your opinion, what's the lowest or the worst point in the whole process in the view of productivity?
I think one of the things we see in the European peers is that they are spanning over both lake management, forest management, hunting, but however, most of the revenues are stemming from forest management. That means that we believe that within this new founded enterprise, we should start by focusing on the forestry, and then again on a longer time horizon, expanding out to these other areas, for instance hunting or hiking in the beautiful mountains. There's a lot of opportunities there, but on a longer time frame.
And if I might just add to that, as you mentioned earlier, right now only 6 million euros is coming into the fund. However, within these 5 years, we'll have the 26 million more in revenue coming into this company with this model if it's fully implemented. And also, that's when we want to start reinvesting and opening out, branching out into other activities, because that's when we will have the finance and the muscle to do it efficiently.
The second part of your question answered now.
Which is the most critical point or phase in process of productivity from the forest to the forest wood industry?
I mean, I think we discussed that actually, and we think the most critical part is efficientizing the value chain, which is up here in the top. This is the most critical part. That's where most of the value is gathered, because the owners of the resources will typically have the high returns. Has not been the case so far because the concession firms has pocketed, but we see this part of the value chain up here as being the most critical part. The very early ones, the logging and the early transportation, is where the most of the value can be captured for your company, because that's where you have the capabilities and the core competencies.
Yeah, now Mr. Jacobi, you have a question?
Yeah. Your plan is based on basically looking at what the others do and then optimizing the process for our case using the know-how which is coming from other areas. Maybe a nice thing would be to create an identity in, let's say, European family of our forestry. Which possibilities for creating our own identity, which is in marketing very important, are there?
A brand name, or what do you mean? A brand?
Identity. We should not be like the Austrians or like the Finns or like the Swedes. Okay. It's nice to know what they do, but we would like to create our own Slovenian identity of our forestry.
What we're considering was actually, especially also for the time horizon. Can we go to the slide for a bit further down the road? Just for above 5 years.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So basically what we're thinking is, especially in terms of creating an identity, is we see this huge potential that we have these 70% that's extremely fragmented and not very efficient. We also see in the case that they face a lot of liquidity issues, and we see a lot of them face bankruptcy, probably because they're very small and they don't have sufficient cash to be able to recur these investments. So what we think is actually that what we would do longer term was to say we want to fund a cooperative agreement where the individual farmers, so let's say here in the smaller areas, they go together investing in, for instance, harvesting machines, so they can optimize their business for the better benefit of the general productivity of Slovenia. So we think that would be a method of combining the public and the private sector to the overall benefit of Slovenia.
The question, Mr. Raja, you got a question?
Yes. What's the product? What this company would sell? Is it only a timber, or were you thinking of some sawmill or some other products?
I think we mentioned earlier also, the main product of the Slovenian Forests Limited would be timber, logging timber in the forest and transporting it out, and then because of the scale, selling directly to very large, both Slovenian sawmills and furniture companies, wood pulp companies, as well as exporting some as well, depending on market conditions. But again, we see your key competencies being within the forest, inside the forest. This is where we see you, and we want to focus on this part to make sure that this part is very successful, rather than spreading out too soon.
Yeah, and if I may add on to that, I also think that the key point why we do that is because one of the objectives is basically that we want to focus on wood processing. We want to develop the forests in Slovenia. We're not interested in producing furniture and competing with IKEA or anything like that. We want to kind of stay close to our core, and that's what we want to develop rather than branching out into something completely different.
Passing from the concession to the contractor model is a switch in the business model. So it gives some space to the company limited that you've created to get better conditions for its future. But how to select efficient contractors and how to grant from the company that you've created that the contractor are successful, are really raising the productivity in what is being done?
I think one of the main things you should do is creating sort of auctions for the forest. So you put it out basically on the market. You should even open it to foreign markets. So it's just basically the market forces that drives with like who gets the actual contract. That being sorry.
Let me finish your sentence.
That being said, as we have in our strategy, it's all about educating the Slovenian labor force. So that's done for our efficiency. Thank you.
Last question, Jethro, you had another one?
I think we ran out of time. Sorry.
Okay, we ran out of time. Then thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.